It's June. And it's time to start enjoying the fruits of your labor. Depending on your crop planning, you may have lettuce, spinach, and other greens, along with radishes, herbs, and flowers, maybe even strawberries in your garden in the next couple weeks. And even if there's nothing to harvest in your garden right now, your outdoor classroom of a garden is likely now warm and sunny and just a lovely place to hang out and enjoy all the work you've put in so far this year. So today we're going to talk about ways to celebrate, enjoy, and share your harvest while building community and connecting the garden to school and to the curriculum. And we are delighted today to have Shauna Anderson joining us from Galiano Elementary as our community mentor. And we'll have more on Shauna in just a moment. For those of you that I haven't met, my name is Tessa, and I am the Central Island Community Animator with Farm to School BC. I previously worked as an outdoor educator, classroom teacher, community coordinator, and farmer, and it's amazing to get to be in a job now where I get to wear all those hats at once. Before we start our workshop, I'd like to acknowledge that today I'm calling in from my home on the traditional unceded territory of the Cowichan Nation, the Hulkaminam-speaking people who have lived here since time immemorial. As a second-generation settler, I am living on land that is the lifeline of past and future Cowichan nations, and I see their culture, their stories, their language, their food systems woven so inextricably into this land, and it is my commitment to be part of reconciliation as a settler in this community. If folks on the call want to share their territories in the chat where they're calling in from, that would be wonderful. And I have the pleasure of co-presenting with Sonia today, and I'm going to pass it over to Sonia.
Thanks, Tessa. Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Sonia. I'm the Kamloops Region Community Animator for Farm to School BC, and I'm calling in from Shukwaat-Magulu, the territory of the Shuswap people. Kamloops is the city that I live in, and it's home to the confluence of the North and the South Thompson rivers. It's a place that holds so much history and value to both the Shuswap people and regional settlers. As an uninvited visitor on these lands, I am on this journey to continue to learn about my physical spaces and the more than human beings that call these beautiful grasslands home. I'm rounding up my second year in this role at Farm to School BC, and I love it. And like Tessa, I have a background in outdoor education, and I work as a part-time teacher on call. Thanks, Tessa. So before we start, I'm just going to share a little bit of background on Farm to School BC for those of you who are new to the scene here. Farm to School BC is a program that brings healthy, local, and sustainable food into schools across British Columbia. We provide students with hands-on learning opportunities that develop food literacy, and we strengthen local food systems by striving to enhance school and community connectedness. Farm to School BC is a program of the Public Health Association of BC and supported by the province of British Columbia. And here's a map of our 8 regional hubs across British Columbia. The regional hubs are coordinated by a local community animator and supported by a network of community partners. If you don't see your district on this map, don't fret. We're still here to support you. Our organization is really growing, and we're happy to support you by connecting you to the nearest animator if you don't see yourself here. And feel free to identify what school district you're coming from today if you'd like. Thanks, Tessa. So Tessa has welcomed us into this space, and here's an overview of the year of our School Garden Mentorship series. I can't believe we're already in June, and following this webinar, we're going to be taking a little pause as you enjoy your summer holidays, and we are going to come back together in September. And for you, those of you who came last year, you'll find the workshop themes are really similar to the previous years, but for this 2024 series, we're focusing on guest speakers and the unique knowledge and expertise they bring. So they're going to be your mentors on this journey. And we also just have a bit of a longer Q&A time to provide opportunity to tailor these sessions and discussions to your needs and the needs of your school garden. So as mentioned, we are going to be rounding off the end of our season in September. Got 2 more, September and October, but the September one, we're going to be focusing on harvesting and seed saving. And this one was actually my favorite one last year, Tessa, so I'm really excited for this. And then for today's workshop, we are going to be talking about ways to honor both the hard work our garden and students have been doing over the course of the year, but also to just talk about celebrations in general and how the garden space can be a physical space to hold those celebrations. So this is going to look like connecting the garden to June festivities that are already happening at your school or in your community, community events in the garden itself, tasting in the garden, spring garden recipes, and then we're going to round it off with our mentor, Shauna Anderson. So Shauna Anderson has been the school garden coordinator at Galiano Island Community School in SD 64 since February 2022. The garden coordinator role is maintained through community organization Galiano Community Food Program, which works to promote growing local food and access to food through several programs and initiatives. With a background in fine arts, nature education, and a strong interest in local biodiversity, like mushrooms, Shauna incorporates these fields into her current work to create dynamic programming for students and those around her. So Shauna presented at the Farm to School conference, the Farm to School BC conference in May and of like last year about Nettlefest. And I had the pleasure of kind of emceeing the space and I was like so tickled. And so we were thinking about celebrations. I was like, oh, let's try to connect with Shauna. So we're really excited to hear more ways about how she connects celebration, festivities, and cooking to garden harvests. But before that, we're going to hear from Tessa in a little bit. So I'll pass it back over to Tessa.
Thanks, Sonia. We're excited to get to Shauna, and Shauna's going to dive into examples of garden harvest celebrations. But before we hand it over to Shauna, we want to share a few ideas for connecting community school and curriculum together in year-end celebrations. June is a wildly busy month with wildly excitable students, and it can feel really daunting to take on a new garden event or a new celebration or build new traditions. And so before we get inspired by Shauna and think big, we want to think, what are some things that are already going on in our schools in June, and how can we weave the garden into these pre-existing celebrations or events in order to still highlight the garden and celebrate what we've done without overwhelming ourselves with a new project. So on this slide, I wanted to share some examples of things that may already be going on in your school and how you can connect the garden to those. So first on the list there is sports day or family fun events often organized by the PAC, some barbecues that likely happen in June in your school. And just want to share some suggestions for perhaps bringing the garden into those events through having a small harvest and recipe that's included for those events. So one of the easiest ways is by doing an iced tea. Likely your garden's overrun by lemon balm or mint or one of those tenacious herbs. And maybe even have some edible flowers. So a wonderful thing to do can be make iced tea for those celebrations. Other things that go on in junior school might be a volunteer recognition event or a graduation ceremony. Perhaps there's some small gifts you could make from a harvest in your garden. Maybe there's some herbs you could dry to make a tea for those volunteers that have worked hard throughout the year. So think about how you can tie, maybe the garden's a physical space to host those recognitions events or to host part of the graduation ceremony. Maybe there's flowers in the garden that you can pick for bouquets for the graduation ceremony. The garden can also be a wonderful opportunity for some of your year-end reflection activities. Perhaps you're doing some student self-assessments or other reflection activities, and just bringing the students outdoor into that garden space can prompt a nice quiet space for students to have self-reflection as they're wrapping up their school year. The garden can also be a great place to celebrate learning, and I'm going to get into example of celebrating learning through poetry reading. A couple other suggestions, perhaps you're doing some buddy activities with your buddy class this time of year. And the garden can be a nice place to have buddy classes, give each other garden tours, show what those buddy classes have been working on in the garden this year. Lastly, we're going to look at community potlucks and how you can bring community into the school garden. The picture on the slide here is a community potluck at Lake Trail Community School. They're a school up in the Comox Valley on Vancouver Island, and they host weekly community potlucks, which is just incredible. They're partnered with a work party in the school garden, and through these weekly potlucks, they have woven a wonderful community gathering feel into their garden, and their garden is well supported by the community. So a lot to coordinate and organize, but once you have these events established, they can bring a lot of richness and sustainability to your garden too. As well, bringing the garden into activities in June, it doesn't need to be around celebrations or events. It can be as simple as just getting your students outside and using that garden as an outdoor space. Sometimes it's less about doing and it's more about just being in the garden and enjoying that space at the end of the school year. To dive into these, a couple of these in a bit more detail, here's just an example of how you could include iced tea into a sports day or into a packed barbecue, a couple steps you might want to think about. One of the beautiful things about tying into other events is that there's other people already organizing those events. You don't need to take on the whole organizing piece of it. You just need to add that garden piece to the larger puzzle. If you are making iced tea for the event, Sonia is going to share a recipe later and also a tip about including edible flowers. Another fun June activity in the garden is doing a mini poetry lesson or poetry reading. The garden can be a wonderful muse. Get inspired by a strange insect or write an ode to a seed that never sprouted. I find sometimes in June, units wrap up and you have those like strange amounts of time. You don't want to start something new. And it can be a great opportunity to just do a mini lesson or a mini unit on poetry in the garden. Last year, Kaylin, who was the previous Farm to School BC Food Literacy Advisor, she had a great idea from her classroom. She had wrapped up a unit of poetry in the garden. She had her students were making little mini poetry books, and she chose to take an extended lunch hour where the students had lunch in the garden. They shared some food with each other, and then they went on to do a poetry reading. And she noted that poetry reading is a really approachable format for students to get up in front of their classmates. Even the quieter students, along with the class clowns, had a place within that. And the garden was a disarming environment for students to share their work. Haiku, when we're talking about poetry readings in gardens, I lean towards the haiku as a really short, approachable poem. I find it's great with students. You can teach it in a short time and create them on the spot. And last year, Kaylin created a few that I'll share here with the garden as the muse. So Kaylin made Street Strawberry Dream arrives in the June full moon, glowing red, warm heart. And an ode to kale was green frilly bitter leaf. Do you smell like feet, my delicious friend? I like that haikus could both be very poetic with beautiful language and also a bit silly or humorous. There's a fun element to a haiku. So last year when we shared those haikus, we had folks start to share their own haikus in the chat, and it was really fun to see other garden haikus. So we're going to put the same invitation out to you all today. Please share if you're feeling inspired, a garden theme haiku in the chat. And we're going to up the ante a bit this year. Anyone that shares a haiku in the chat will be entered to win a copy of Adrena, a Mining Bee. This is a wonderful children's graphic novel about native pollinators written by an author in the interior. And Sonia there has a copy that she will send out to you. So throughout the workshop today, if you're feeling inspired, please add a haiku into the chat for all of us to enjoy. If you're not familiar with the haiku form, there's a little how-to there. It's 3 lines. The first line has 5 syllables, the second line has 7, and then rounds it with another 5-syllable line. So I invite you to share those. We've been talking about events that you do with your class in the garden or ways to tie in at the school level. We also wanted to share some ideas around bringing the community into the garden in June. Hosting a community tour or community open house is an amazing time to tie together and create evidence of core competency development in your students. There's so much that can go into students organizing and hosting a community event in the garden, a wonderful way to celebrate, showcase, and assess their learning in June. Hosting a community gathering in June in your garden has to be quite strategic. It's often the time of year that you're starting to feel overwhelmed about how you're possibly going to fill all your summer gardening volunteer spots or how you're going to have volunteers provide the care and oversee of the garden in the summer. So inviting more community into your garden this time of year can help build your pool of volunteers, or maybe just even giving neighbors more of a sense of the garden, and they then can be watchdogs throughout the summer, looking out for vandalism or other things that are going on in the garden over the summer when there's less activity at the school in the garden. So just a reminder, in June, if you have capacity, find a way to invite the community into the garden. Lastly, a lot of what we've talked about requires some sort of gathering space in the garden to use the garden as an outdoor classroom or to host these events. And so just wanted to share a couple ideas for building gathering space into your garden. The picture on the left there is a school in Port Alberni, and that school garden is mostly run by parents, and they were feeling overwhelmed by the amount of garden space they had, and they also want an outdoor classroom. So they had this win-win solution of covering up some garden beds with a wooden platform and then putting a prefab gazebo on top of it. And they love their outdoor classroom space there. And they also now have a garden that's more manageable with less garden beds. So thinking about what are your opportunities around creating outdoor classroom spaces. Another photo on the right there is also a school in Port Alberni that has a fire pit with a stump circle as their gathering space. This is a really simple, low-cost way of bringing a gathering space into a garden. It's also a wonderful way of connecting Indigenous food systems. This fire is used to traditionally smoke salmon with the students, and it's also a great outdoor winter community classroom space that the students can sit around the fire in the winter. Not all districts allow fires within school gardens, but I do have a couple examples of districts on the island that do. So if you want to connect with me about that, feel free to reach out. Gathering spaces can also be really small and simple. Here's a picture of an industrial spool that's used as a little table. And then on the right, there's a picture of using reclaimed material. These are saplings that are woven together to form a beautiful pergola and wood stumps underneath. So just wanted to share those ideas. If you're looking more at garden design, you can go back and watch our February School Garden Mentorship workshop, which gets into more detail about gathering spaces and other design elements in gardens. But I'm going to pass it back over to Sonia now to round out this section.
Thanks, Tessa. I'm still working on my haiku over here, but I already own the book. Elaine's a great author, so the local like bee advocate. So I recommend trying a haiku. It's time to transition though into my favorite way to celebrate the fruits of our labor. And it's through recipes and tasting. Just a note though, these like few slides are not like an overall overarching overview of all the possible ways that you can incorporate and engage with food. So if you like have more questions about recipes and tasting ideas, like please connect with us and with me. I will talk about food and eating and ways that we can incorporate this into our learning for hours. So please do that. Thanks, Tessa. So there can be, as Tessa mentioned, there can be so much for us to harvest by June. Depending on where you live in British Columbia, this will vary, but if you live on the coast, you know very well that June is a really bountiful month. Where I live here in Kamloops at our market, we're already seeing greens, radishes, and one of my favorites, which I know is a salad turnip, but also can be called the Hackeri turnip. And you can see a picture of it right there in that slide. We'll come back to it. But I want to start with a little bit of a veggie pun. So you can take a moment if you'd like to read that veggie pun pictured here. And maybe it's a little silly, but I'm the silly person, probably that class clown writing their poem. But in all honesty, when we're getting ourselves ready for these celebrations, I think it's really important to think about how we can incorporate what's growing in our garden into literacy and fun activities. So that can include like what we've mentioned, haikus and poetry, but also like really leaning into like comics or like graphic illustration or puns, because all of that is really still embedded in our like BC curriculum. And, you know, we could talk about pickup lines and like ways, like funny ways to have like Valentine ideas for February. Like it's just, there's just like a lot of possibility with veggie puns. And then we can also explore some really new and easy recipes. So these braised turnips are Hackeri turnips, and they're really easy and also compare well with chives or green onions that are in season. You can eat their greens, which makes them a super versatile food to grow. I personally like love learning about foods that grow quite easily that you can eat every part of. So we have the recipe there for you, I believe, to check out. So let's just keep talking a little bit more about the benefits that come to our students when they're tasting foods we're growing. So we have a few examples here I'm going to mention, and I also just want to say that we don't need a huge sampling to get all these benefits. We can have a really small sampling to help us like build descriptive vocabulary. We can develop our observational skills. We can learn and think about poetic language in relationship to food and veggies and fruits. We can have a social and connected experience, share with our peers our learnings, embed an assessment right into it, teach and share our knowledge, and also look at collecting and sorting data. And so in the spirit of June, I'm wondering if folks can just put something in the chat that their students or their peers are tasting right now in the garden. And if you're not tasting anything in the garden, think about what you would like to taste in the garden in June. All right, let's see, Tessa, see what we get. I just like to put up this slide. This is actually, I was thinking about the 2023 series, and this was mentioned here as a great resource that we have in our Hands-on Food website. This example is an easy and valuable resource that you can use as an observation sheet. And I really like that not only are there these really simple columns set up, but we're like thinking about what it tastes like and having to tap into our language and vocabulary around taste and different senses. Oh, okay. I'm really liking Shauna. Kale sprouts. Yum. Strawberries. Yes, I had a wild strawberry yesterday, my first wild strawberry. I haven't had a garden strawberry yet here in Kamloops, but it's pretty exciting. All right, Tessa, you want to go to the next slide? Because I want to talk about this vocabulary. So sometimes I know I take for granted, like the bank of knowledge of words I have or don't have on any given day. And really, like, students have these words too. I just think we tend to like lean into what we're most familiar with or like what's easiest to grab from our memory bank. So I really like this vocabulary that's set up here because we are going to think about our senses and also the experiences we're having when we're using language like this. And in developing this slide, I accidentally said like, oh, hey, we could have like a spelling program associated with these sensory words. But then I said a smelling program instead of spelling. So now I'm committed to having a smelling spelling program where like you'll just do like all the scent vocabulary for a spelling test. So there's like a little happy accident of how we can incorporate some of this language into a spelling program. Go for it. Next slide, Tessa. And then I want to also just mention a really beautiful piece that had like was sent my way in my district recently, was talking about ways that we can incorporate some of this language and some of the learning about food into our assessment. So celebration of learning is what we do here in the Kamloops region as one of our forms of assessment, is we have a way to showcase the learning that students have been doing and engaged with. So Paul Denby here in Kamloops decided to have like a beautiful appy buffet for all of the students and their parents. So that's another really fun way that we can incorporate that into our learning and our assessment. And then lastly, I'm just going to take a moment and address like 3 really simple recipes. So this rhubarb is up here in Kamloops. I think you've got rhubarb too right now, Tessa. And something really easy to do with rhubarb is just to make a little bit of a simple syrup. And this type of syrup is called a shrub. It's got a little bit of vinegar in it, so it's a bit tangy. And you can mix this syrup with sparkling water. It would be delicious and refreshing on a sports day, or you could use it to be a little bit of like a sophisticated tea party element, and you could dress up and have your fancy little rhubarb shrub syrup. And then I have the iced tea recipe, or one of many iced tea recipes that you could use that Tessa was making a reference to talking about sports day. And then hot tip here, you can put edible flowers in it, but if you put the edible flowers into an ice cube tray the night before, then they won't like float at the surface and get in your teeth. They'll actually float in the ice cube. And then it's in there and it's beautiful and gorgeous. So that's just like something I do as well in my own backyard and I really enjoy. And then our last recipe, it's more of just like a friendly reminder that a salad dressing is really simple to make and really fun and accessible for students. And just in case you've forgotten your ratios, here's our ratios for a salad dressing. I sometimes like to like blend herbs right into the salad dressing. And we've incorporated the Project Chef website into this chat as well, just because they have some really excellent videos on anything from processing herbs to a little bit more elaborate cooking, but they're like really easy step-by-step videos for you to check out when you have the time. Oh, I see. Do I see haiku in there? Okay, hold on. Oh, should we mention, does someone want to read that out loud before we transition over to Shauna, or would you like me to read it?
I had to add one, Sonia, but that's why I'm very slow on progressing your slides as I was trying to write a haiku here.
Oh, okay. Do you want to read it?
But I wanted to get the haikus rolling, and I love fava beans, so there's an ode to the fava bean.
You want to read it? You should read it.
I'm sure. Fab, rad, fava bean, barbecue, butter, salt dash, food for soil too.
Ah,
Just get us going with that.
I love it. Thank you so much. Lovely. Thank you. And it's my pleasure to introduce Shauna, the garden coordinator at Galiano Community School. And once again, Shauna, like, thanks for taking the time to be here, and we're happy to hear what you have to share with us.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me. So just a sec here. I'm kind of working with 2 machines. Um, so as you know now, my name is Shauna Anderson, um, and I'm located on Galiano Island, working at the Galiano Community School in SD 64. I just want to recognize the territory that I'm living and working on, which is that of the Hewitsam, Penelakut, and Penelakut peoples, as well as other Halkominam and Tsimshian speaking peoples. It's also the ceded territory of the Tsawwassen First Nations. Um, I'm in the Salish Sea, so the southern coast between the mainland and Vancouver Island. Um, Galiano traditionally was a meeting place for many peoples. People would come, they would harvest from their gardens and food forests. They would save food to take to other camps. It was a really important place. And I just want to really recognize that because I feel like I draw from that basis all the time when I'm working in the garden. So, yeah. Um, all right. So, things to know before I go any farther. Um, Galiano Community School is very small. We have 57 students, about, let's see, 7 staff members, and we have 3 classrooms. So we have K1, 2, 3, 4, and 4, 5, 6, 7. And I split my time working with all those classes, and work with those individual teachers to develop special classroom programming that we'll do in the garden. Sometimes I do some pieces in the classroom, but usually it's outside all the time. Um, yeah, so we are a very small community. We're about 1,300 full-time residents. Of course, we are a tourist destination, so that doubles in the summer and it becomes absolute madness. um, but I'm really fortunate because I work with a community group, so that I have 2 other coordinators that I work with that support my work. I know in previous presentations here, you guys have talked about how you have a garden team and that support system. And so I just want to recognize that I don't work completely alone. I'm very well supported. And I also, you know, we kind of cross pollinate all of our work. Um, some of it is providing community meals, part of it is operating our food bank. Um, Other parts are educational or like food co-op, like we have a garlic growing co-op and things like this. So we have a lot of things going on, but the school garden is a really big part of it. Okay, I better get into it. I will say that I am a parent as well, so I'm very active. I'm on our pack. I have 2 children who are students at the school. Um, And I draw very heavily from my background working in ecological restoration and nature education. So I often fall back on those things that I've learned. I find it works very well in the garden. Okay, next slide, please. All right. So happy accident. There's one of our beautiful garden iced teas that I made a few years ago. Um, My recipe is lavender, mint, and lemons. And of course, we've got our garnish in the bottom there of flowers, but I should have done the ice cubes. Should have done that next time. um, yeah, these are just 3 examples of ways that we enjoy our harvest. The students help me pick all the herbs. We process it right there outside on a picnic table. I used my camp stove. We make a really, a lovely concentrated tea and dissolve the sugar or the maple syrup and then pour it all over ice, which is really fun and exciting for kids. They are very thrilled by things melting. um, yeah, potatoes in the center there. Potatoes are a big deal for us. My first year as the school gardener, I went pretty crazy. I grew a lot of potatoes. So um, those have formed kind of a winter, like a keeper crop. So we enjoy them later in the season. But that was us harvesting, I think, in September at some point. And then on the end there, we've got a sunchoke harvest. So we have a lot of perennial beds and areas of the garden. So sunchokes are one of them, and you do have to keep them kind of under control. So we harvest very heavily, and I'll even sometimes sell excess to the community um, because we have had some very excellent harvests of those. Um, Okay, next slide, please. Right. So, um, that previous one was just my little checklist of things that I think about when I'm trying to plan. Um, Obviously, communicating with school staff. I realize lots of you might be school staff, so that might not be as big of a piece. Um, Sometimes simplicity is better. I like to set out an achievable outcome for us. Um, Obviously, fitting into curriculum is really important, but also playing and having a lot of fun. So I try to balance those two things. Um, the motor skill building, using tools, u- using knives, building that confidence, I think is very important. Um, my co-coordinator mentioned, she'll be doing cooking with a group of students, and some of them will look at her and go, "Am I allowed to use this knife? Are you sure?" And she's like, "No, you're going to do this, and you're going to cut this up, so you're going to use the knife." Um, Building that confidence is so important. Um, and yeah, tasting the food, trying new things. I think at the school garden, whether it's at recess or whether it's during a planned time with the classroom, kids are so eager to try things when they're with their peers, um, things they wouldn't normally try. I often say to parents, you would not believe how much kale your kids are eating at school. Like they would probably never eat it at home, but because it's being offered in a completely different atmosphere, perhaps. But they willingly seek it out and eat it all the time. Okay, next slide. So Nettlefest, yay! um, so after uh, COVID, of course, we were allowed back into the schools as outside volunteers. We were not allowed to come in for a time, but yeah, we it had happened at the school previously. I don't have the exact number, but it was a traditional thing every spring. And so um, bringing it back with a slightly larger student population as well has been really exciting because I've gotten to expand it and change it up and make it even more exciting. All right, so with a lot of support, I run Nettlefest every spring, usually in March. I try to aim it for before um, spring break here, but we have held it also in April. It does depend on the weather, and if you're in a more northerly region, April might be better for harvesting. Um, so Nettlefest is a combination of cooking, science, literacy, games, and then ending with a big feast. Um, so we have stations that we rotate through with different activities. This is a complete collaboration between the school staff and my co-coordinators and myself, which does take a lot of planning, of course. Um, so I will say, let's go to the next slide. So our harvest day or harvest days sometimes. This year we did it all in one day, which was very exciting. Um, so our nettle harvest happens on the school grounds. So we just go to one side of the school grounds to do it, which makes things really simple. All the nettles harvested together are the ones that we eat. So even though, yes, we need them to pull off Nettlefest, I don't put a lot of pressure on students. Like, you haven't picked enough, go pick more. I don't say that. It has never happened that I've had to go and supplement, but the kids are industrious. They work hard and they enjoy it. I think the picking is a big part of the Nettlefest fun. Um, So let's see. So I always start off by demonstrating for the kids how to do it properly. We wear rubber gloves and we use scissors. We'll have bowls or reusable bags that we collect into or baskets. Um, and I have the teacher, so it'll be the whole classroom there. So around 17, 18 students or 20. I think one class is 20. The teacher and the EAs will be there, and together we'll all, make sure everybody's included and giving it a shot. Um, so let's see, what was I going to say? So, yeah, the safety is a big piece because you're giving 18 children scissors. So we will go over safety again and again as we go, and I will re-demonstrate as we harvest. Because there's always one student who wants to bring the entire nettle in, but we only pick the top 4 or 6 sets of leaves for harvesting and eating. Um, Usually, based off of the demographic of the class, I'll talk about the life cycle of the nettle and how we do leave some of the nettles. We don't pick every single one. As most of you probably know, nettles have no problem rebounding from being harvested. They're very vigorous plants. We talk about their root systems, and we also talk about how they do spread seed. So they have more than one way to spread, which is really interesting in terms of plants. Um, Another big part of the day is I always bring along with me plantain and dock. Those are common names for 2 medicinal plants that are great for easing nettle stings. Um, and that's really important. Often dock or plant, actually both of them will be growing alongside nettles, which is usually you can find it, but I always bring some along just in case we can't. So we will talk about those healing plants and how, you know, the nettle sting can really hurt, and it can be soothed though. And I will say that most times kids sting themselves out of curiosity. Of course, accidental stings happen, and we just approach it with a calm energy. And um, I'll show them how to make a quick poultice by chewing up the leaf and spitting it onto the sting or spreading it with their fingers. Um, Sometimes they let me do that, but I encourage them to do it because I think it is a good way to learn how to use plants to your benefit. Um, so let's see. All right, next slide, please. Right. Yeah, so this is on the Nettle Fest day. So we have a whole morning set aside, and this is in our kitchen. We're really lucky enough to have a school kitchen. So the kids are in multi-age groups. So there is a lot of support happening from, the older students who have done Nettlefest before to the younger students. Um, I think all the kids in these photos are in grade kindergarten and grade 1, and they were popping edamame out of the shell and learning to use the food processor, which was very exciting. Um, and yeah, just that confidence building piece of I can do that. I can use that. Um, and learning how to handle foods. And so much of preparing food is, yeah, it's with your hands, and it's so great for building those memories. And yeah. Okay, next slide. All right. So this is kind of the full circle here. So I left out purposely photos of the other stations because they are focusing on different things. But we've got our harvesting happening, and then we've the preparing, then the nettle pizza here, and the soup and the pot behind, and the big giant feast table that the students help set up. And we learn about service and how to like prepare for eating a big meal, and um, everyone clearing their own dish and scraping into the compost what they can't eat. And there's that piece to it too, of this kind of like community care. So that makes it really, really fun. Um, okay, I will try to hurry up a bit. Right. So I do have some recipes I wanted to share. I'm gonna see if it's still gonna. Oh, no, there we are. I'll share it after the talk, but I have a little folder of recipes from Nettlefest and a few other things to share. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, just a few things that we enjoy using nettles. So a nettle and chickpea soup, nettle and edamame pesto, and those crostinis there, nettle pizza, of course, and the nettle and lemon cake. So there's my son. um, I sadly didn't get any photos of the cake, but it's a big, big, exciting piece of the day. Okay, next slide. Right. Yeah, just some up close shots of enjoying the food. Um, all right. Uh, yeah, I think we can head on to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a bit about other things that I do, other celebrations. Um, in the spring, we often have lettuce growing in our greenhouse, and some overwintered spinach outside, and of course the massive abundance of kale and kale sprouts that we all love. Um, excuse me. And not this spring, but the previous one, we did a salad bar. So one classroom came out in small groups and they helped me make the very simple dressing. And then another group helped harvest all the greens, and a third group helped me wash everything and prep it down. And then we took it, well, it was recess time, and I took everything outside, and all students were welcome to come and have some. And it was really fun and just a nice way to um, also incorporate the other classrooms. So preparing things for others and learning what that was like. Okay, next slide. And this is another one we do in June. So this one's really adorned with the flowers. They were getting very into garnishing, which was great. Um, yeah, we just did a very simple hummus. Um, chickpeas that I'd cooked at home, uh, olive oil, lemon juice, salt, and of course the chopped up garlic scapes. So garlic is such a great crop, I feel, for school gardens, though I know it can be a little tricky because it's harvested in the summer. Um, but it's a great way to enjoy it. And the scapes, or the flowering stem coming up from the garlic, can be so mild compared to garlic, which, you know, most kids I know like garlic a lot, but some can find it a little strong. So it's a great gateway to garlic. Um, and they love using my hand blender, my immersion blender. So we basically just took turns using the immersion blender during the preparation time, which was fun. Okay, next slide. This is one I do every year. I just finished doing this with a class last week. Um, so not all of our harvests are edible, but they're useful. Um, Somebody, I don't know who, planted comfrey at the garden, and I, it can be very vigorous and can spread. So I try to control it by harvesting it, or, you know, heavily picking it. And it doesn't seem to affect it at all. It comes back every year. And when it gets to the flowering stage, that's when I want to definitely cut it and use it to make comfrey tea. which we have a lot of fun with even after the fact. So we prepare it, of course, and let it ferment for a little bit of time. It doesn't take long if it's in a sunny spot. And I then we'll come back with the students and we'll uh, give it a sniff and we'll talk about what happened and why the changes happened. So that's a really fun one that isn't necessarily about eating, but it's very important to learn about. So next slide, please. Right. Um, yeah, I can't advocate enough for having perennial crops in your garden. We are really lucky and we have apple and pear and a very vigorous grapevine. Um, among other things, we also have rhubarb, which I know we all love and enjoy. Um, raspberries, strawberries, of course. We actually have gooseberries, which are very thorny, but that has never deterred students from harvesting every single fruit off of it. um, yeah, it's in the fall, just thinking ahead, coming back to fresh grapes and pears and apples um, is really special. Next slide, please. So I just want to touch very briefly on our other big whole school celebration, which is in the fall, and it is Apple Fest. So yeah, it's very similar to Nettlefest, same dynamic of multi-age groups rotating through activities that I've listed here. Um, Apple Fest is really a little bit different though, because we do bring in our juicer. So the food program owns a really nice uh, apple press or fruit press. So we have a volunteer who's very experienced that comes and runs that with the students. So that's really fun and exciting. And having fresh apple juice is a huge treat. Kids learn all about tasting and identifying different flavors. There's so many different apples, and the Gulf Islands, where I'm located, have quite a history of settler farming, and there's some really old varieties of apples here. So heritage apples, I guess they're referred to as. So we often collect different samples from the community. It's a really great way to connect the community to the school because they'll come and bring their apples. Some of them will stay and volunteer on the day, and it's really special in its own way. In the bottom corner there, those are the apples, some of the apples that we harvested from our own trees. So we pick those and we save them. Some get eaten during school, but we save a bunch and use them for cooking and juicing. Um, right on. Okay, so almost done. I think I've just got one more slide. Um, we can go to the next one. Yeah. So our keeper crop. Because I am not a teacher, I get to garden all throughout the year, which enables me to grow things like potatoes. I often, after I harvest our garlic in the summer, I will plant potatoes. So I choose varieties that have like a 65 days to maturity, and I put them right in after, like the same day I harvest the garlic, and then we come back, and in October we're harvesting these, and it works out great. We then can keep them, and we usually in November and December have a one day where we make fries. Um, sorry. Um, so traditionally, it's been the grades 2 and 3. They come in groups to the kitchen, and my co-coordinator Allison helps with the preparation, um, and then I take it outside to serve at recess. So bringing that element in, where one group of students is preparing something for everybody, and I realize that is achievable because we are so small, but it's a really great way to build community and pride in your work. Like, yeah, I made those fries and now everyone's loving them and enjoying them. Um, I should say as well, we make our own ketchup. Usually that's done by me or another coordinator, from tomatoes that we have saved. So I'll freeze a few through the summer and have enough to make a nice batch. Maybe if we get get planning, I could make the ketchup with a different group of students. So maybe that's the future of this fun day we call Friday. um, okay. Well, I think that's everything I had to say. Um, I would love to hear any questions or comments.
Oh, thank you so much, Shauna. This is so lovely. Also, I love like your final note saying it's Friday because today is Tuesday, but what a nice way to round that off. Oh, that's so lovely. Thank you. That was so informative. What a rich experience those like students and community have. I have a couple questions, but I'll leave it open for folks for some questions. We've got like 6 minutes for questions if anyone has questions. And if you don't get your question in now, you can always follow up with an email. Shauna, are you comfy with folks emailing you? And I think great. Yeah, we can send that up in the resource that comes after this, and folks will watch the recording. So any questions from the audience? Sometimes this happens where folks are like, I don't want to, I'm going to be the first. Okay. Oh, you have a question. Okay, I'm gonna ask my question first. Yeah, no, so I guess I just wanted to see like if you noticed a change in attitudes with folks like kiddos and Nettle after this like celebratory experience, because I do know like a lot of places on the coast eat it, but it's still like a stingy thing. So I'm wondering if like after creating like a celebration and some knowledge share about it, is there a bit of a change in attitude, like, you know, the year following?
I would say definitely. This so we always have a science station, and that has varied so widely over the years. But um, that's a big one because it's just a time to actually observe it, and whether that be through just a magnifying glass or a microscope, even, but also creating discussions around the plant itself, why it stings. So trying to understand the plant from the plant's point of view has been a big one. Um, and kids are so. I had a student last year who, well, his parents let him eat it raw because you can fold it up in a very special way that protects the little stinging
Yes.
hairs from stinging you. He was not allowed to do that at school. He was very disappointed. But we talked about it and just, why that would be. Well, how he could eat it with it being raw and not get stung. Um, and yeah, just I guess creating spaces for discussion too, where kids can ask these questions
Mhm.
and not, yeah, just to really focus in on one thing like we do, um, leads to so many great discoveries. And our literacy project this year during Nettlefest was um, taking words, like many, many different types of words that were all connected to nettle in some way, and um, kind of making an inspired drawing and writing the word. And I thought that was really brilliant because it was so simple, but
Mhm.
then it's building, right? It's building this vocabulary, and being able to um, what's the word? Yeah, just it didn't matter if you didn't have more than one word, you just worked on that one, but then they made a huge collage of it afterward that I think is still up at the school.
Hmm.
Um, so there can be more time for reflection and more time for that to percolate. And I think a piece I would really like to bring in is going back to it, like after a month, and looking at the nettles again and seeing how much they've regrown, and then them going to seed and seeing also maybe like insects, because I know certain types of butterflies lay their eggs on nettle. So I would love to frame it in terms of how the nettle is also part of this ecosystem, and not just for eating and enjoying. It's wonderful, but that it's a part of a system. Um,
Yeah,
in that.
I really appreciate that deep dive. And actually, the question in the chat there also is like encompassing of that deep dive of. So Becky's wondering if you ever make rope from the nettle. Yeah,
Mm.
nice to hear that in our last couple moments.
Yeah, we haven't. I would love to get into more fiber arts, because of course nettle has such a history of that as well. That's on my to-do list. I need to find my nettle fabricator out there. We've made dye from nettle, um, painted with the dye. We've used nettles to make beautiful prints, like taking the leaf or the stem and rolling it with ink, just to make some beautiful printmaking pieces. But yeah, there's just so many ideas. I find nettles are just they're there, they're accessible, and there's endless things you can do with them from so many perspectives. So I am a huge fan, obviously. Um, I'm just gonna throw my little recipe link in here, and then I know we're at time, so I won't keep going on and on. All right, here we go. Okay. Oops, I think I just sent it directly to Tessa. Sorry. I'm very clumsy with the
I will
technology.
reshare it with everyone.
Yeah, please
Thank
do.
you for sharing. There we go. Thank you for sharing recipes, and thank you just for the inspiration. I feel like there was so much in that presentation to inspire us to bring into our own gardens, our own classrooms. And I feel like although a lot of it's rooted in the garden, there's also things you can do even if you don't have a school garden, of just incorporating some of these activities around cooking and around sharing meals with classes. So thank you, Shauna. I look forward. I know it's a small crew of us here today, being June, and it's such a busy time, but I look forward to having this recorded to be able to direct other teachers and other garden coordinators towards this. And we will follow up with resources on Thursday, and we will have Shauna's email in there if you want to reach out and ask more questions. I know I had a big question about community partnerships I wanted to ask you that can't be answered in the last minute. But I feel like you're a wealth of information and such an inspiration. So thank you for being on the call today with all of us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Thank you so much, Shauna. I'm also sending you some mushroom questions soon. So I know for that. Oh, okay. Thanks everyone for coming. And Tessa, I guess we'll see everyone in September. This has been lovely.
Yeah, have a wonderful
Thank
summer,
you.
and please reach out with questions anytime about your own school gardens. We'd love to hear from you. Take care, all.